The room was so quiet you could hear the champagne bubbles popping. Alexander Thorne, a man worth $16 billion, was sweating through his $3,000 custom shirt. Across the table sat Heinrich Gruber, the most feared industrialist in Europe, staring at Alex with pure, unadulterated disgust. The deal was dead. $4 billion gone. Alex opened his mouth to beg, but he didn't speak the language. He was drowning. Then, from the shadows, a voice cut through the silence. It wasn't a diplomat or a lawyer. It was the girl pouring the water. And what she said made the billionaire freeze in absolute terror. Alexander Thorne was a man who believed in control. He controlled the market share of Thorne Dynamics. He controlled the board of directors with an iron fist. He even controlled his heart rate during hostile takeovers. But as he stood in the private dining room of Le Jardin, Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant, Alexander realized he had absolutely no control over the traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge. "Where is she, Mark?" Alexander hissed, his voice a low vibration that only his personal assistant could hear. He didn't look at Mark. He kept his eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors of the private suite, waiting for them to open. Mark, a young man who usually looked like he had stepped out of a GQ catalogue, currently looked like he was about to vomit. He tapped his phone screen with a trembling thumb. "She's not answering, sir. The agency said Sarah is the best translator in the city, but her GPS tracker hasn't moved in 40 minutes. There's a pileup, a bad one." Alexander closed his eyes for a brief second. "Get another one." "Sir, it's 7:55 p.m. on a Friday. Even if I found one, they couldn't get past security and into this room in 5 minutes. Mr. Gruber is in the elevator now." Alexander felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. This wasn't just a dinner. This was the culmination of 3 years of negotiations to acquire Gruber Steel, a German manufacturing giant that held the patent for a specific alloy Thorne Dynamics needed for their new aerospace division. Without that alloy, Alexander's company would miss the government defense contract deadline. The stock would tank. He would lose billions. But money wasn't the issue. It was pride. Heinrich Gruber was known as the Iron Bear of Munich. He was 70 years old, traditional, stubborn, and hated Americans. He viewed them as loud, uncultured, and superficial. "He speaks English, right?" Alexander asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Everyone in Europe speaks English." Mark swallowed hard. His bio says he understands it, but he refuses to conduct business in anything but German. He considers it a test of respect. If you don't care enough to speak his tongue, you don't deserve his steel. That's what the dossier said. "Perfect," Alexander muttered. "Just perfect." The heavy oak doors groaned open. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Walking in was Heinrich Gruber. He was a mountain of a man, even at 70. He wore a suit that looked like it was cut from grey stone, and his face was a map of deep lines and stern judgment. Flanking him were 2 silent bodyguards who looked more like statues than men. Alexander put on his best smile, the smile that had charmed Wall Street investors and tech journalists alike. He stepped forward, hand extended. "Herr Gruber," Alexander said, his voice projecting confidence he didn't feel. "Welcome to New York. It is an honor." Gruber stopped. He looked at Alexander's hand, then up at his face. He didn't smile. He rattled off a sentence in German that sounded like a bag of gravel being thrown into a wood chipper. "Ich hoffe, Sie haben sich besser vorbereitet als Ihr Vorgänger, Herr Thorne." Alexander froze. He kept the smile plastered on his face. He looked at Mark. Mark looked at the floor. Alexander stammered. "Yes, absolutely." Gruber narrowed his eyes. He said something else, shorter this time, sharper. "Wo ist Ihr Dolmetscher?" Alexander knew that tone. It was a question, a demand. "My translator," Alexander began, his throat dry. "She is indisposed. Traffic. A terrible accident. But I am sure we can communicate the universal language of business. Yes?" Gruber stared at him for 5 agonizing seconds. Then he let out a short, dry laugh that had no humor in it. He turned to his bodyguards and muttered something that sounded distinctly dismissive. He sat down at the table, ignoring Alexander's outstretched hand. Alexander sat opposite him, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was a disaster. He needed to salvage this. He needed to show respect. "Wine," Alexander signaled to the shadows of the room. "Bring the 82 Petrus." The sommelier hurried forward, but Alexander waved him away. He wanted the best server. He wanted perfection. From the back of the room, a waitress stepped forward. She was young, perhaps 24, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that violated the restaurant's aesthetic, but highlighted her high cheekbones. Her uniform was slightly too big, hanging off a frame that looked too thin. She moved with a strange, silent grace, like a ghost haunting the banquet. This was Emma. Alexander didn't know her name. To him, she was just staff, a prop in the play. He didn't notice that her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying in the break room. He didn't notice the way her hands shook slightly as she picked up the crystal decanter. All Alexander noticed was Heinrich Gruber's face. The German billionaire was looking around the room, drumming his fingers on the table. "Dies ist eine Zeitverschwendung," Gruber grumbled to the air. "Ein Amerikaner ohne Ehre. Denkt, Geld löst alles." Alexander laughed nervously. "Yes, excellent atmosphere." Gruber's head snapped up. He looked at Alexander with incredulity. "Do you know what I just said?" Gruber asked, in heavily accented broken English. I assume you were complimenting the restaurant?" Alexander lied. Gruber's face went red. He slammed his hand on the table. "I said you are a waste of my time. I said you are an American without honor who thinks money solves everything." The silence that followed was deafening. The clinking of silverware from the main dining room felt miles away. Alexander Thorne, the titan of tech, felt about 2 inches tall. "Herr Gruber, please," Alexander said, dropping the facade. "The deal, the alloy. We can offer 20% above market value." Gruber stood up. He grabbed his napkin and threw it onto the table. "I do not sell to children," Gruber spat in English, then switched back to rapid-fire German, his voice rising in volume. He was ranting now, insulting Alexander's preparation, his company, and his entire lineage. Alexander panicked. He looked at Mark. Mark was useless. He looked at the door. He was about to lose everything. He needed to say something, anything, to stop this man from walking out. "Wait!" Alexander shouted. Ich bin... Gruber stopped. He looked at Alexander with pity. "Pathetisch." Gruber turned his back. He began to walk towards the door. Alexander slumped in his chair. It was over. The humiliation was total. He watched the back of the German industrialist's suit, knowing that when that door closed, the stock price would plummet by morning. "More water, sir?" The soft voice came from his right. It was the waitress, the thin girl. She was holding a pitcher of water, her face pale. "Not now!" Alexander snapped, lashing out. "Get away from me!" But the girl didn't move. She didn't look at Alexander. She was looking past him, directly at Heinrich Gruber's retreating back. And then she opened her mouth. Emma Vance knew she was invisible. It was the first rule of high-end service. Be present, but absent. Anticipate the need before the guest knows they have it, but never, ever intrude on the reality of the dinner. She was a ghost in a waistcoat. She needed this job. She needed the tips. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had slid a final eviction notice under her door that morning. Her mother's medical bills were sitting in a stack on her kitchen counter, unopened, because looking at the totals made Emma's chest feel like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. She had been in the room for 10 minutes, standing in the shadows, holding the heavy crystal pitcher until her wrist burned. She had watched the slow-motion train wreck unfold. She had watched the arrogant American CEO, Alexander Thorne, wither under the gaze of the German giant. She had seen this dynamic 1,000 times, rich men playing games with ego. Usually, she tuned it out. It was just noise. But today, she couldn't, because she understood every single word Heinrich Gruber was saying. She heard the insults. She heard the specific dialect, Bavarian, specifically from the Oberbayern region. She heard the frustration of an old man who felt disrespected, not because of the money, but because of the lack of protocol. When Gruber had said, "Ein Amerikaner ohne Ehre," an American without honor, Emma had flinched. Now the deal was collapsing. Gruber was leaving, and Alexander Thorne, a man who could buy this entire city block, looked like a frightened child. "Don't do it," Emma told herself. "Stay invisible. If you speak, you get fired. If you get fired, Mum doesn't get her medicine." She stepped forward to refill Alexander's glass, hoping to just do her job and disappear. Alexander snapped at her. "Get away from me." His anger was palpable. But Emma didn't leave. She saw Gruber's hand on the brass doorknob. If Gruber left, the restaurant would lose the booking. The manager, Henri, would be furious. The tips would be 0. Everyone would suffer because 2 rich men couldn't talk. The words bubbled up in her throat. They were dangerous words. They were words from a life she had buried 5 years ago. A life before the scandal. A life before she became just a waitress. She took a breath. "Herr Gruber," she called out. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a timbre that cut through the room. It wasn't the voice of a servant. It was the voice of an equal. Heinrich Gruber stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He paused, his hand still on the door. Alexander looked up, his eyes wide with shock and rage. "What are you doing? I said get out!" Emma ignored the billionaire. She spoke again, her German flawless, her accent capturing the precise, aristocratic Lilt of the Munich elite. "Verzeihung, aber es wäre ein schwerer Fehler, den Raum zu verlassen, bevor Sie den 82er Petrus probiert haben. Er wurde speziell für Ihren Gaumen dekantiert. Forgive me, but it would be a grave error to leave the room before you have tasted the 82 Petrus. It was decanted specifically for your palate." The silence in the room changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was electric. Heinrich Gruber slowly turned around. His bushy grey eyebrows were knitted together in confusion. He looked at Alexander, then at Mark, and finally his gaze landed on the waitress, holding the water pitcher. "Wer hat das gesagt?" "Who said that?" Gruber asked, scanning the room as if looking for a hidden speaker. "Ich war es, mein Herr." "It was me, sir," Emma said, lowering her head in a respectful, but not subservient, bow. Alexander Thorne's mouth was hanging open. He looked from the waitress to the German tycoon. "What? What did you say to him?" Gruber walked back toward the table, his eyes locked on Emma. He looked her up and down, taking in the cheap uniform, the tired shoes, the messy bun. He looked offended that she had dared to speak, yet intrigued by her accent. "Sie sprechen Deutsch?" "You speak German?" he asked, skeptical. "Woher? Die Schule?" "From where?" "School?" Emma raised her chin. She switched dialects slightly, matching his Bavarian tone perfectly. "Nein, meine Großmutter lebte am Tegernsee. Ich habe die Sommer dort verbracht, als mein Vater noch geschäftlich in München zu tun hatte." "No, my grandmother lived on Lake Tegernsee. I spent summers there when my father still had business in Munich. Gruber's eyes widened. Tegernsee was an exclusive, wealthy enclave south of Munich. It wasn't a place for tourists. It was a place for old money. Tegernsee, Gruber murmured. He stepped closer to her, ignoring Alexander completely. Where ist Ihr Vater? Who is your father? Emma gripped the water pitcher tighter. Her knuckles turned white. This was the danger zone. If she said the name, everything could blow up. That is not important, sir, she said in English, then switched back to German effortlessly. Wichtig ist, dass Herr Thorne großen Respekt vor Ihnen hat. War so besorgt Ihre Ankunft, dass nun ja, hat vielleicht die Vorbereitung übertrieben und dabei das Wesentliche vergessen. What is important is that Mr. Thorne has great respect for you. He was so worried about your arrival that perhaps he overthought the preparation and forgot the essentials. She turned to Alexander, switching to cool, professional English. Mr. Thorne, Herr Gruber is offended because you tried to start the negotiation before breaking bread. In his culture, business follows brotherhood. You must toast him first. You must ask about his grandchildren. Alexander blinked, his brain trying to catch up. His grandchildren? He has 3. 2 boys, 1 girl. The girl just started riding horses competitively. Alexander stared at her. How do you know that? I listened, Emma said simply. While you were checking your watch. Gruber was watching this exchange with a look of intense fascination. He didn't understand all the English, but he understood the body language. The billionaire was clueless. The waitress was in command. Gruber let out a bark of laughter. It was a genuine laugh this time. He pulled out his chair and sat back down. Setzen Sie sich. Sit down, Gruber commanded, pointing at Alexander. Alexander scrambled into his seat like a schoolboy. Gruber then pointed a thick finger at Emma. Und Sie? Sie gehen nirgendwo hin. Sie übersetzen. And you? You aren't going anywhere. You translate. Sir, Emma started to protest. I have tables to wait on. My manager. I will buy the restaurant if I have to, Gruber roared, slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Sit. Emma looked at Alexander. Alexander Thorne, the man who made $50,000 an hour, looked at the waitress who made $12 an hour. His eyes were pleading, desperate. Please, Alexander whispered. I will pay you. Whatever you want, just sit. Emma hesitated. She thought about the eviction notice. She thought about the medicine. She set the water pitcher down on the side table. She smoothed her apron, and with all the dignity of a queen ascending a throne, she pulled out the chair between the billionaire and the industrialist, and sat down. Very well, Emma said. Let's negotiate. But as she sat, she felt a vibration in her pocket. It was her phone. She ignored it. But if she had looked, she would have seen a text message from an unknown number. I know you're in there, Emma. And I know who you really are. Don't think you can hide forever. The atmosphere in the private dining room shifted from a funeral wake to a high-stakes chess match. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Emma sat with her back straight, her hands folded on the white tablecloth. To her left, Alexander Thorne, the master of Silicon Valley, looked like a nervous intern. To her right, Heinrich Gruber, the Iron Bear of Munich, looked like a predator toying with his food. Fragen Sie ihn nach der Lieferkette, Gruber grunted, slicing into his duck. Ask him about the supply chain. Ich will wissen, wie das Wolfram beschaffen will, ohne die chinesischen Exportzölle zu bezahlen. I want to know how he intends to source the tungsten without paying the Chinese export tariffs. Emma turned to Alexander. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but her mind was racing. She knew this question. It was a trap. If Alexander said he was buying direct, Gruber would know he was lying or cutting corners. "Mr. Thorne," Emma said, her voice steady. "Herr Gruber asks about your tungsten supply chain. Specifically, he is concerned about the tariff workaround. He is testing to see if you are using grey market suppliers." Alexander wiped sweat from his forehead. "Tell him we have a dedicated subsidiary in Vietnam. We source raw ore, refine it locally, and ship it as a finished component. It bypasses the raw material tariff legally." Emma nodded. She turned to Gruber. "Herr Thorne lässt ausrichten, dass die Problematik versteht. Nutzt eine Tochtergesellschaft in Vietnam zur lokalen Raffination. Das Wolfram wird als fertige Komponente importiert, was vollkommen legal ist und die Rohstoffsteuer umgeht. Kauft nicht auf dem Graumarkt." Gruber paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Alexander with a glimmer of newfound respect, then looked at Emma with narrowed eyes. "Du kennst den Unterschied zwischen Rohstoff und Komponente in der Steuergesetzgebung? You know the difference between raw material and component in tax law?" Gruber asked her directly. Emma froze for a microsecond. She had slipped. A waitress shouldn't know international trade law. "I read the newspapers, sir," she lied smoothly in German. "And my father, he complained about taxes often." Gruber chuckled. "Gut. Sehr gut." The dinner continued for 2 hours. It was a grueling marathon. Alexander would throw out a figure, Gruber would scoff and counter with an insult, and Emma would filter the insult, extract the counteroffer, and present it to Alexander wrapped in diplomatic silk. She wasn't just translating words, she was translating culture. When Alexander wanted to push for a fast-track timeline, Emma warned him. "Don't," she whispered. "Germans value precision over speed. If you rush him, he thinks you are sloppy. Tell him you want a thorough integration phase." When Gruber started ranting about American labor unions, Emma signaled Alexander to simply nod and drink his wine. "Do not argue politics," she murmured. "Just agree that efficiency is paramount." By the time the dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé that Alexander was too nauseous to eat, the deal was done. Gruber wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his jacket pocket. "De Vertrag," he commanded. Mark, the terrified assistant, scrambled to pull the heavy legal document from his briefcase. He slid it across the table. Gruber didn't read it. He looked at Emma. "Ist das, was wir besprochen haben? Is this what we discussed?" It was a moment of supreme trust. The billionaire was asking the waitress if the contract was valid. Emma looked at the document. She scanned the bolded clauses. The acquisition price, $4.2 billion. The retention of the Munich workforce, a key point Gruber had insisted on. The patent sharing agreement. "Yes, Herr Gruber," Emma said softly. "It honors your legacy." Gruber nodded. He signed his name with a flourish. Heinrich Gruber. The room seemed to exhale. Alexander Thorne slumped in his chair, a smile finally breaking across his face. He had done it. He had saved the company. "My God," Alexander breathed. "We did it." He turned to Emma. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a burning curiosity. He really looked at her for the first time. He saw the fraying collar of her uniform. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. But he also saw a sharp intelligence that scared him. "Who are you?" Alexander asked. "I mean, really? You know trade law. You know Bavarian dialect. You know negotiation tactics that my Harvard lawyers don't know." Emma stood up abruptly. The spell was broken. The deal was signed. And now she was just a servant who had overstepped. "I am just the waitress, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice tight. "And my shift ended 20 minutes ago. I need to clear the table." "No," Gruber boomed. Both of them looked at the German. Gruber stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Ich gehe jetzt, aber ich habe eine Bedingung." "I'm leaving now, but I have one condition." Emma translated automatically. "He has a condition. Diese Frau," Gruber pointed a thick finger at Emma. "Sie ist der Grund, warum ich unterschrieben habe. Sie hat Ehre. Ich vertraue ihr." He says, "I am the reason he signed. He trusts me." Emmas voice wavered. "Sie muss die Überwachung der Fusion leiten. Sie ist meine Verbindungsperson. Ohne sie kein Deal." Emma stopped. She couldn't translate that. "What did he say?" Alexander asked, leaning in. He said good night," Emma lied. Gruber slammed his hand on the table. "Nein, übersetze es!" "No, translate it." Emma swallowed hard. She looked at Alexander. "He says that I must oversee the transition language, that I am his liaison. Without me, the deal is void." Alexander stared at her. Then he laughed, a relief-filled, joyous laugh. "Done," Alexander cried. "Absolutely done. You're hired. Whatever you want. Triple your salary. No, 10 times your salary." "I can't," Emma said, backing away. "I can't work for you." "Why not?" Alexander asked, bewildered. "You're a waitress. I'm offering you a job at Thorne Dynamics, a corner office, a signing bonus that would pay your rent for a decade." "I said I can't." Emma's voice rose, cracking with panic. She grabbed the water pitcher, desperate to have something in her hands, to return to the safety of her role. Gruber watched her with narrow eyes. He leaned in close to Alexander and switched to English, his voice low and gravelly. "You are a fool, Thorne," Gruber said. "You look at the price tag, but you do not look at the history. Watch this girl. She is running from something, and people who run usually bring the wolves with them." Gruber nodded to Emma, a sign of respect, and swept out of the room, his bodyguards trailing behind him. Alexander was left alone with Emma. The silence stretched between them. "I need to go," Emma whispered. "Wait," Alexander said, standing up. "At least tell me your full name, for the check." "Emma," she said. She hesitated. "Emma Vance." Alexander Thorne froze. The blood drained from his face, faster than it had when Gruber threatened to walk out. Vance. He knew that name. Every financier in New York knew that name. "Vance?" Alexander whispered. "As in, Richard Vance?" Emma didn't answer. She dropped the pitcher. It shattered on the floor, crystal shards exploding across the expensive carpet. She turned and ran. Emma sprinted through the main dining room of Le Jardin, ignoring the shocked gasps of the patrons. She dodged a waiter carrying a tray of escargot and burst through the swinging double doors into the kitchen. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clanging pans, and steam. "Emma!" Henri, the floor manager, stepped in front of her, his face purple with rage. "What are you doing? I saw you, sitting at the table, drinking with the guests. Are you insane?" "Move, Henri," Emma panted, trying to sidestep him. "You are fired," Henri screamed, poking a finger into her shoulder. "Get out! Leave your uniform! You will never work in this city again!" "I quit!" Emma shouted back. She didn't have time for this. She pushed past him, heading for the employee lockers. She needed her bag. She needed her phone. She needed to disappear. Alexander Thorne recognized the name. Richard Vance. 5 years ago, Richard Vance was the CFO of Titanium Global. He was a legend, a philanthropist, and then, overnight, he was a monster. The SEC uncovered a Ponzi scheme disguised as a hedge fund. $3 billion of pension funds vanished. Richard Vance had been arrested on live television. 2 days later, he was found dead in his holding cell. Heart attack, the coroner said. Suicide, the whispers said. Murder, the conspiracy theorists said. But the money was never found, and Richard Vance had a daughter, a brilliant prodigy who had been attending Wharton Business School, a girl who was being groomed to take over the empire. When the scandal broke, the daughter vanished. The media hunted her for months. They said she had the keys. They said she knew where the money was. Alexander stood in the private room, the shattered crystal crunching under his dress shoes. "Mark!" he barked. Mark popped his head in from the hallway. "Sir, get security. Secure the exits. Do not let that waitress leave the building." "The waitress? Sir, Mr. Gruber is waiting at his limo. Forget Gruber. Get the girl." Alexander ran out of the room. He didn't care about the dignity of a CEO anymore. He sprinted through the dining room, following the path Emma had taken. Back in the locker room, Emma tore off her apron. She grabbed her heavy winter coat from her locker and shoved her arms into it. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't zip it. She grabbed her phone. There was another message from the unknown number. "Sent 2 minutes ago. Nice performance, Emma. Daddy taught you well. I'm outside. Don't try the back door." Emma stared at the screen, her breath hitching in her throat. They were here. After 5 years of hiding in Queens, of scrubbing floors and serving coffee, of dyeing her hair and wearing colored contacts, they had found her. She looked at the rear exit, the heavy steel door that led to the alleyway where the garbage trucks came. If he was outside the front, the back was her only chance. The text was a bluff. It had to be. She slammed her locker shut and ran for the back door. She threw her weight against the push bar. The cold night air hit her face like a slap. The alley was dark, smelling of wet cardboard and old grease. Rain was falling in sheets. She took a step out, pulling her coat tight. "Going somewhere, Miss Vance?" The voice came from the shadows behind the dumpster. Emma spun around, backing up against the brick wall of the restaurant. A figure stepped into the pale yellow light of the street lamp. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a hitman. It was a woman. She was dressed in a sleek black trench coat, holding a black umbrella. She looked impeccable, dangerous, and terrifyingly familiar. "Cynthia," Emma whispered. Cynthia Reynolds, her father's former chief of staff. The woman who had sworn on the Bible that she knew nothing about the fraud. The woman who had testified against Richard Vance to save her own skin. "It's been a long time, darling," Cynthia smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. "You're hard to find." "Emma? Really? A bit common for a Vance, isn't it?" "Leave me alone," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I don't have it. I don't know where the money is. I told the FBI. I told the lawyers, and I'm telling you." "We know you don't have the money, Emma," Cynthia said, taking a step closer. Her heels clicked on the wet pavement. "If you had the money, you wouldn't be waiting tables for minimum wage. We know you're innocent." "Then why are you hunting me?" "Because," Cynthia stopped 3 feet away, "you don't have the money, but you have the ledger." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Cynthia snapped, her poise cracking for a second. "Your father was old school. He didn't trust the cloud. He kept a physical ledger, the Black Book. It contains the account numbers for the offshore shell companies. And the last time anyone saw that book, it was in your backpack the day he was arrested." "I burned it," Emma lied. "Liar," Cynthia hissed. She reached into her pocket. Emma flinched, expecting a gun, but the back door of the restaurant burst open. "Hey!" Alexander Thorne stood in the doorway, panting, his expensive suit soaked instantly by the rain. Behind him stood 2 burly restaurant security guards. Cynthia looked at Alexander, then back at Emma. She smiled again, composing herself instantly. "Mr. Thorne," Cynthia said smoothly, "what a surprise." Alexander looked between the 2 women. He sensed the danger immediately. "Who are you? Get away from her." Cynthia chuckled. "Just catching up with an old friend. Isn't that right, Emma?" Emma looked at Alexander. This was her chance. She could run to him. But if she did, she would drag him into this mess. She would expose him to people who killed billionaires for breakfast. "She's nobody," Emma said to Alexander. "Please, just let me go." "I can't do that," Alexander said, stepping into the rain. "I know who you are, Emma. I know about your father." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "The plot thickens. It seems you've made quite an impression tonight." Cynthia took a step back, fading into the shadows of the alley. "We aren't done, Emma. You have 24 hours to bring me the book. Or I start releasing the other names. The names of the people who helped your father, including your mother." "Don't you touch her!" Emma screamed. But Cynthia was already walking away, disappearing into the dark rain. A black sedan idled at the end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the gloom. She got in, and the car sped away. Emma slid down the brick wall, collapsing into a crouch. She buried her face in her hands. Alexander walked over to her. He waved the security guards back inside. He stood over her, shielding her from the rain with his jacket. "The ledger?" Alexander said quietly. "That's what this is about? The missing $3 billion?" Emma looked up, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You should have let me run, Alexander. You have no idea what you just walked into." "I just signed a deal with Heinrich Gruber," Alexander said, offering her a hand. "I think I can handle a little drama." Emma looked at his hand. It was manicured, soft, the hand of a man who had never been in a fistfight. "These people killed my father," Emma said, ignoring his hand and standing up on her own. "And now they're going to kill me." "Not if you have resources," Alexander said. "And as of tonight, you are the highest paid consultant at Thorn Dynamics, which means you have my security detail." "I didn't accept the job." "You don't have a choice," Alexander said, his voice hard. "Gruber won't deal without you. And that woman, Cynthia, she won't stop hunting you. You need a fortress, Emma. I have one. I need a translator. You are one." He looked her in the eye. "Help me save my company, and I will help you save your life." Emma looked at the end of the alley where the black sedan had vanished. She thought of her mother, sick and alone in a crumbling apartment in the Bronx. She thought of the medical bills. She thought of the threats. She looked back at the billionaire. "One condition," Emma said. "Name it. Nobody knows who I really am. To the world, I'm just the translator. If the press finds out Emma Vance is back, I'm dead anyway." Alexander nodded solemnly. "Done. Welcome to the team, Miss Vance." He gestured toward the door. "Now, let's get you out of the rain. We have a lot of work to do." As they walked back into the warmth of the kitchen, Emma felt a strange sensation. For 5 years, she had been running away. Tonight, for the first time, she had stopped running. But as the heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, she wondered if she had just walked into a cage even more dangerous than the one she left. Because Alexander Thorn didn't know the whole truth. The ledger wasn't just a list of bank accounts. It contained the names of the investors who had profited from the scheme. And one of those names was Thorn Dynamics. The next morning, Emma Vance ceased to exist. In her place stood Emma Miller, the newly appointed executive liaison for European affairs at Thorn Dynamics. Alexander moved fast. By 8 a.m., he had moved Emma and her mother out of their crumbling Bronx apartment and into a secure corporate penthouse in Midtown. It was a temporary housing unit for visiting executives, he claimed. But to Emma, the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park felt like a spaceship. By 9 a.m., A team of lawyers had her sign 19 non-disclosure agreements. They didn't ask about her background check. Alexander had sealed her file personally. By 10:00 a.m., she was standing on the 80th floor of the Thorn Tower, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than her mother's medical treatments for the last 3 years. "Breathe," she whispered to her reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. "You look the part," Alexander said, walking in behind her. He looked different today, sharper, more in his element. The panicked boy at the restaurant was gone. The titan of industry was back. "But the wolves are waiting. You ready?" "Do I have a choice?" "No." Alexander handed her a tablet. "The board of directors is freaking out. They know I hired a waitress to manage a $4 billion merger. They think I've lost my mind. You need to prove I haven't." They walked into the boardroom. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a long mahogany table. 12 people sat around it, men and women in expensive suits who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. At the head of the table sat Victoria Sterling, the company's CFO. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with icy blonde hair and eyes that tracked movement like a hawk. Victoria had been the right hand of Alexander's late father. She was the one who really ran the money. "So," Victoria said, not bothering to stand, "this is the miracle worker." "This is Emma Miller," Alexander said, pulling out a chair for Emma. "She saved the Gruber deal." "I heard," Victoria said dryly. "She speaks German. Congratulations. My niece speaks German. She's 12. Does she have an MBA, a background in mergers and acquisitions, security clearance?" "I have something better," Emma said, her voice cutting through the tension. She didn't sit down. She remained standing, placing her hands on the table. "I have Heinrich Gruber's trust." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Herr Gruber views this board as a collection of vultures," Emma continued, channeling the arrogance she had seen in her father's old friends. "He believes Americans are sloppy. He is looking for a reason to pull out. The contract has a good faith clause. If he feels the transition team is incompetent, he walks away with a $100 million kill fee." Emma slid the tablet across the table toward Victoria. "I spent the night reviewing the transition protocols you prepared, Ms. Sterling. They are standard, boilerplate. If you send these to Munich, Gruber will be insulted. He uses a specific inventory system called just-in-time sequence. Your protocol suggests batch processing. That error alone would cost Thorn Dynamics 6 months of production delays." The room went silent. The other board members looked at Victoria. Victoria picked up the tablet. She scrolled through Emma's notes. Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles turned white. "And how?" Victoria asked softly. "Does a waitress know about just-in-time sequence manufacturing?" Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't say, "Because my father stole $3 billion from companies that used it." "I read," Emma said, "and I listen. Now, do you want to debate my resume, or do you want to close this deal?" Victoria held Emma's gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Fine," Victoria said, dropping the tablet. "She stays. But Alexander, if she messes up a single decimal point, it's your head on the block, not mine." "Understood," Alexander said. As the meeting dispersed, Alexander leaned in close to Emma. "That was incredible. You handled Sterling better than I do." "She hates me," Emma whispered. "She hates everyone. Come on, I'll show you your office." Her office was next to Alexander's. It was sleek, modern, and filled with screens. But as soon as Alexander left to take a call, Emma didn't start working on the Gruber files. She locked the door. She sat down at the high-powered terminal. She had access. For the first time in 5 years, she was inside a financial fortress. She opened the command prompt. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't looking for German steel protocols. She was looking for the ghost in the machine. Last night, she had told Alexander that his company was on the list of investors in her father's Ponzi scheme. Alexander had denied it. He said his father, the founder, was a moral man. Emma needed to know the truth. She searched the archives for Titanium Global, her father's fund. Access denied. She tried searching for the date of the crash, October 14th, 2019. Access denied. Sensitive files are air-gapped, she muttered. Of course, Alexander wouldn't keep the dirty laundry on the main server. She needed physical access to the Black Archive, the hard copy records room in the basement. Every major corporation had one for legacy tax documents. She was about to log off when a secure internal email popped up on her screen. It wasn't for her. It was a forwarded chain she had been accidentally CC'd on because of her new executive clearance level. Subject: The Problem. Sender: Victoria Sterling. Recipient: External. Encrypted. The message was short. The stray dog has entered the house. Do we put her down or let her eat? Emma stared at the screen. The stray dog. It had to be her. Victoria Sterling wasn't just the CFO. She was part of it. Emma took a screenshot and saved it to a hidden folder. She had walked into the lion's den, hoping to find safety. Instead, she had just realized that the lion was sitting in the office down the hall, and the lion knew she was here. Emma played the part of the executive perfectly. For 3 days, she wore the tailored suits Alexander bought her, charmed the German delegation, and restructured the entire logistics plan. She made Alexander look like a genius. But while the company celebrated, Emma was hunting. She knew the stolen $3 billion from her father's fund hadn't just vanished. It had gone somewhere. And on Friday night, while the rest of the tower was empty, she went looking for it. She used Alexander's stolen keycard to access Sub-Basement 3, the Dead Records Archive. It was a concrete tomb of financial history. Emma moved quickly to the 2019 section, her flashlight cutting through the dust. She found Box 402, Titanium Global, External Transfers. Her hands shook as she ripped open the lid. She scanned the invoices until she froze. A transfer receipt. August 2019. Amount $50,000. From Titanium Global to Sterling Associates, LLC. Final destination, Thorn Dynamics, Operating Fund. It was a pass-through. Her father hadn't just lost the money. He had been used as a piggy bank to save Thorn Dynamics from bankruptcy. And at the bottom of the page, authorizing the illegal transfer, was a signature in blue ink. It wasn't Alexander. It was Victoria Sterling, the CFO. Alexander's godmother. I knew you were smart, a voice echoed from the darkness. But I didn't think you were this fast. Emma spun around. Victoria Sterling stood in the doorway of the document cage, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. She held a phone in one hand and a cold, satisfied smile on her face. You really are your father's daughter, Victoria said, stepping into the light. He was nosy, too. That's why we had to remove him. Emma backed against the shelves. You killed him. You framed him for the fraud? I saved this company, Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. Alexander's father was weak. He was going to let the legacy die. I used your father's money to keep the lights on. We owe you. Technically, she nodded to the men. Get the file, and make her disappearance look like an accident. The men moved forward. Emma had nowhere to run. Suddenly, the heavy steel fire doors at the end of the hall slammed shut. The elevator pinged. Alexander Thorne stepped out. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, and in his hands he gripped a red fire axe. Get away from her, Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Alexander, Victoria sighed. Go back upstairs. This is grown-up business. I saw the security alert, Alexander said, walking forward, raising the axe. And I heard you, Victoria. You killed Richard Vance? You built my company on blood? I did it for you, Victoria screamed. Kill them both. The hitmen drew silenced pistols. Run, Alexander yelled. He didn't attack the men. He swung the axe with all his strength at the overhead sprinkler main. Clang! The pipe burst. A torrent of high pressure, filthy water exploded into the room like a fire hose, blinding the gunman and soaking the floor instantly. The hitmen slipped, firing wildly into the ceiling. Alexander grabbed Emma's hand, dragging her toward the emergency stairwell. The roof! We have to get to the chopper! Alex, the file! Emma cried, stumbling on the wet concrete. I have it! He shoved the crumpled papers into his shirt. They burst into the stairwell, jamming the door shut with the axe, just as bullets sparked against the metal. They scrambled up the stairs, flight after flight, their lungs burning, while the killers pounded on the door below. They were trapped in a vertical coffin, and the only way out was up. The roof of Thorn Tower was a war zone. A thunderstorm was raging, whipping the rain into stinging needles. Alexander and Emma burst onto the helipad, gasping for air, only to see the company helicopter banking away. The pilot, spooked by the gunfire from below, disappeared into the clouds. No! Alexander screamed. Come back! They were stranded. Behind them was an 800-foot drop to the streets of Manhattan. In front of them, the stairwell door banged open. Victoria Sterling stepped onto the roof, her raincoat flapping in the gale like bat wings. The two gunmen flanked her, weapons raised. It didn't have to be this messy, Alexander, she shouted over the wind. Give me the papers. I promise I'll make your deaths quick. You'll slip in the storm. A tragic accident. Alexander stood in front of Emma, shielding her. You want the proof? He pulled the soggy file from his shirt. The blue signature was still visible. Come and get it. He didn't hand it to her. He threw it high into the air. The wind caught the documents, scattering them like confetti into the abyss of the night. No, Victoria shrieked, lunging for the flying paper. The hitmen were distracted for a split second. Now, Emma screamed. She didn't run for the door. She sprinted toward the massive satellite dish array on the edge of the roof. She knew the Munich deal was scheduled to be signed via live satellite link at midnight. It was 6 p.m. in New York. Midnight in Munich. The system was live. Emma smashed the glass cover of the control panel with her elbow. She slammed her hand on the button labeled Emergency Broadcast. All channels. A high-pitched feedback whine screeched through the massive rooftop speakers. A green light blinked. Transmission active. Herr Gruber! Emma screamed into the emergency handset, her voice booming across the roof and beaming across the Atlantic. Hören Sie mich! Das ist Emma Vance! Can you hear me? This is Emma Vance. Victoria froze. She turned, her face pale. She pulled a gun from her pocket and aimed it at Emma. Turn it off! Victoria screamed. Don't shoot! Alexander yelled, tackling the nearest gunman to the ground. She's live! The whole world can hear you. Emma didn't stop. She stared right at Victoria. This is Emma Vance. I am on the roof of Thorn Tower. Victoria Sterling is pointing a gun at me. She just confessed to the murder of Richard Vance and the embezzlement of the pension fund. You're lying! Victoria shouted, her voice picked up by the sensitive array. I did what was necessary. I built this empire. Nobody cares about a dead crook. I care, Emma said. And I think Heinrich Gruber cares. The sound of sirens rose from the streets below. Dozens of them. Then, a voice boomed from the speakers, a voice from 4,000 miles away, amplified by the storm. I hear you, child. It was Heinrich Gruber. His voice was thunderous. Miss Sterling, the German billionaire continued, I have just cancelled the wire transfer, and I have recorded your confession. The German authorities are contacting the FBI as we speak. You are finished." Victoria lowered the gun. Her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees on the wet tarmac. The power she had wielded for decades evaporated in the face of the one thing she couldn't bribe: the truth. The stairwell door burst open again. This time it was a SWAT team. "Federal agents, drop the weapon." As they cuffed Victoria, she looked up at Alexander with venom in her eyes. "I built you. You are nothing without me." Alexander wrapped his arm around Emma, holding her tight. "It was never yours, Victoria. And now we're going to build it back, the right way." 6 months later, the small Bavarian bistro in the West Village smelled of warm pretzels and victory. Alexander sat at a corner table, looking tired but happy. He wasn't wearing a tie. The heavy wooden door opened, and Emma walked in. She looked radiant in a cream-colored business suit, placing a briefcase on the table. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "The SEC meeting ran long. They found the last shell account. My mother's pension is fully restored." Alexander smiled, pouring her a glass of water. "And the company?" "We took a hit," Emma admitted. "The stock is down, and we had to sell the corporate jets. But the board is clean. Gruber stayed with us." "He likes a fighter." "He likes you," Alexander corrected. "He sent a wedding gift, even though we aren't getting married." "Let me guess," Emma laughed. "A case of 82 Petrus?" "Exactly." Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. "The position is still open, Emma. VP of International Operations. I can't pay you what I promised 6 months ago, but—" "I don't know," she teased. "I was thinking of going back to waiting tables. Less gunfire." Alexander squeezed her hand. "Please don't. I'd be lost without my translator." Emma looked at him, the man who had risked his life for her. "I'm not just a translator anymore, Alex." "I know," he said softly. "You're the boss." Emma raised her glass. "Of uns." "To us." "To us," Alexander replied. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, but inside, the future was finally unwritten. And that is the incredible story of how a single forgotten waitress took down a corrupt empire. It's a powerful reminder that you should never underestimate anyone based on their uniform. Intelligence, bravery, and integrity can be found in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Alexander Thorne thought he was just hiring a translator, but he ended up finding the only person who could save his life. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more stories about underdogs winning against the odds, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were in Emma's shoes? Would you have run, or would you have stayed to fight? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.